Welcome to Healthy Living, the Azure Standard Podcast. Azure Standard, your source for organic, natural, earth-friendly products. Visit us at azurestandard.com. Azure Standard, for over 30 years, a family-owned, independent business where you're considered a part of our family. Membership is always free, and we'd love for you to join us on our journey toward abundant and healthy living.
Something is being hidden in this agenda. There's a hidden agenda. Otherwise, they would be bragging it up and telling people, hey, contains GMOs. This is better. It's obviously not. There's a reason they don't want to tell you.
That was David Stelzer, organic food pioneer, farmer, and founder and CEO of Azure Standard, which he founded over 30 years ago on his organic family farm in Oregon. In this special three-part series, David Cross will be speaking with David Stelzer along with our special guest, author and anti-GMO pioneer, Jeffrey Smith. They'll be discussing GMOs, which stands for Genetically Modified Organisms, and why you should be asking questions about GMO in our food supply, and how you can be certain that you're buying non-GMO food. GMO foods, safe or scary? Scientifically proven? Or are we asking the wrong questions? Does transparency matter, or is there a cover-up? Here's more with David Cross.
Anyone reading the news recently cannot fail to have noticed the case against Monsanto and its Roundup and glyphosate-based herbicides. But Monsanto is not just the producer of Roundup. It's also a major GMO and biotechnology corporation with a well-orchestrated PR and marketing arm designed to put forth its views on how good and safe GMO is. But as the recent case against Monsanto began to demonstrate, a great deal of this information about the safety, or otherwise, of Roundup, glyphosate and GMOs has been spun and manipulated by Monsanto to its own ends, and the dissenting voice has been quieted over the years by Monsanto's communications machine. We start our discussion today with Azure's founder and CEO, David Stelzer, who shares his views on some of his concerns about GMOs.
Well, number one, when it first came to me, as I first heard the concept of GMO, it didn't totally scare me. At first it seemed to be okay, or kind of okay. Needed to be a lot, obviously a lot of research and a lot of experimentation before they got released, but hey, it sounded kind of okay. But then when they actually got released, they were released for a specific purpose. The vast majority of genetically modified grains, plants, I should say, were released specifically to resist herbicides. Glyphosates in particular, mostly throughout, the genetically modified plants of the world that are being raised in large quantities. That's the number one attribute. That's the number one reason. And in my opinion, those herbicides are some of the most toxic things to humans that there could possibly be. And by creating plants that resist those and allow you to put more herbicides on and create a resistance to that herbicide, that's what really opened my eyes to there's a problem here. This is not being used in the right way, even if it was a good concept to begin with, which I'm not so sure it is at this point. But even if it was, it's being totally abused and totally misused. And that was what opened my eyes and what created the number one objection to me. And then the second piece is the huge campaign of the proponents of genetically modified product to not tell the customer, the consumer, that it contained them. That's a big deal to me. If, as a consumer, even if it didn't bother me, for many reasons, I would want to know that corn contained a fish gene. That could mean something to me. What if I was, dietary restrictions? There's religious purposes for not eating specific foods. And not being told, and a huge campaign for not telling. I mean, labels are easy to change. People change labels all the time. There's really no good reason for not telling people that it contains genetically modified organisms in it someplace. That, to me, was the second scare. Something is being hidden in this agenda. There's a hidden agenda. Otherwise, they would be bragging it up and telling people, hey, contains GMOs. This is better. It's obviously not. There's a reason they don't want to tell you, or that the big companies supporting and patented, that have the patents on GMOs, don't want the consumer to know that it contains GMOs. If it was not subpar product, they would definitely be bragging it up. So that was the second red flag that came to me. And from a marketing perspective, hey, if it's something better, you'd want to tell everybody.
Of course, yeah.
Next, I asked David what he and Azure had done to learn more about their suppliers' use of GMO ingredients, so that Azure itself could be certain whether they were, inadvertently, selling GMO ingredients or products.
Well, it has been a process, truthfully. It first really came to my awareness. Initially I didn't think we're in the natural foods. We don't really have to deal with that. Came to my awareness in about 2001 or 2 that was not necessarily the case. So our very first attempt, the very first thing that we did, is we sent out a questionnaire to every one of our vendors and asked them, basically, we gave them some options, and if their product was genetically modified or contained genetically modified ingredients. And we had answers like, my product contains no genetically modified products, or we don't sell anything to Azure that contains genetically modified organisms, or I don't know if my product has genetically modified in it or not, or says my product does, and I think it's, basically it's great that, this is what we do. And so, we had products that definitely fell into some of the latter categories in those early years. And so we began to work on, we didn't instantly discontinue everything. We did that over the course of a couple of years. And it took a little bit of time, and even as we got new introductions, it's been an ongoing, continuing battle, because they'll tell us when we pick it up that it contains no GMOs, and then later they decide to cheapen the ingredients a little bit and don't bother to tell us that they're not, sourcing non-GMO soy or something anymore for, an isolate of some sort. And so it has definitely been an ongoing battle. And then we've moved, from one level to another. So now you've got, multiple generation genetically modifieds. And truthfully, we're not 100% there on that. We are 100% there as far as we do not sell any directly genetically modified products here at Azure. But we do still sell a few items that are second generation genetically modified. How do I, from genetically modified second generation, what I mean is that, for instance, it's meat or an egg or cheese. So we're selling some specialty cheese of some sort that, is not certified organic. Now, the vast majority of what we have is certified organic, which does guarantee that the whole chain is not genetically modified. But, okay, so there's, this specialty cheese of some sort. Is there any guarantee that that cow never got, somewhere in its food chain, never got genetically modified? That's really hard to guarantee now, especially that now that we have not only genetically modified, it could even be grass-fed. which was another thing that we kind of went safety. Okay, we're doing grass-fed. But that may not be the case now that we have genetically modified alfalfa. Mm-hmm. It could be, in order to completely guarantee that second generation, you got to go a little bit deeper.
Right.
So, and there are some organizations that are helping do that and bring that up. But, there are still a few things here at Azure that we've sold for many years, traditional type items that have second generation GMOs. And, we are proud to not be selling any first generation.
I'll be speaking with David again later in our podcast. It's easy to find information and resources touting how great GMO technology is, but as our special guest for this episode, Jeffrey Smith, is about to share, there is a very thin veneer to scratch at to uncover deeper concerns about GMO and the companies involved in it. Jeffrey Smith has opposed the use of genetically modified foods since they were introduced in the 1990s. And since 2000, Jeffrey was the spokesperson and vice president for the accredited genetically modified organism testing company, Genetic ID. He's the author of several books, Seeds of Deception and Genetic Roulette, and he directed and produced Genetic Roulette, a documentary film. And in September 2018, he releases his new film, Secret Ingredients. He is the founder and current executive director of the Institute for Responsible Technology.
So, Jeffrey, good morning and welcome to Healthy Living, our podcast. I'm so grateful for you spending the time with me, and thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's exciting.
Now, you're just back from the Monsanto trial in California. I believe you were there on the concluding session. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was there for the closing arguments, and it was better than any TV courtroom drama. It was amazing. The lead litigator, Brent Wisner, we became friends last year when we were both on the Doctors TV show. And the way that happened was interesting. I was originally in the Doctors in 2015, right after the World Health Organization's top committee declared glyphosate, which is Roundup's active ingredient, as a probable human carcinogen. And, of course, Monsanto cried foul and said, no, it's actually safe. And so the doctors invited their top toxicologist, and towards the last minute they said, we should probably have someone from the other side. So they called me, and I was on via Skype. So we debated back and forth, and she said at the end of the show that she's very confident in the safety of the product, and she said, I can say that as a mother, and I can back it up as a scientist. So, and I, of course, was raising all of the different health dangers. Cancer was just one of them. And so about 2-3 years later, the Monsanto trial came up, and they were attacking Monsanto for not letting people know about the carcinogenicity, and people were getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is very implicated in the research. And so Brent Wisner, turns out he actually was able to release millions of Monsanto documents because Monsanto forgot to object within the 30-day limit that the law required. And so Wisner did not go to the judge and say, is it okay to release? They said, no, actually, we read the law, and it's okay to release. And fortunately, he did, because when he did, we realized the truth. We already knew that they were lying, but we actually discovered how they were lying. So I called up back to the producer at the Doctors, and I said, guess what? Donna Farber, who I debated on your show a couple of years ago, was lying. Because in private, she said, we can't say that Roundup doesn't cause cancer because there's not enough research. She ghost wrote an article and hid the fact that she was a ghost writer and reduced the concern about miscarriages after exposure. She indicated that she was aware that deaths in some of the animal feeding studies could be related to GMO, to Roundup, and that the tumor that was created in one particular rat study was probably related to the full formulation. And all that was in the secret documents, but what she said public was totally different. So they said, well, okay, why don't we have you on for 3 or 4 minutes? Well, after they looked at it and actually read some of these articles and talked to the lawyer, they dedicated an entire show to it, which is almost unprecedented. I don't think they've ever done that. And that's how I met Brent Wisner. So I knew he was amazing. And then what happened in the closing arguments was even more astounding.
It was really a landmark case, and It's funny what you say there about that information that had been withheld. I remember a film many years ago about the supposed bombers in England, and it was a film with Daniel Day-Lewis and Emma Thompson, and there was a piece of evidence that had been hidden in police archives, and it said on the front, "Not for the defense," but she managed to get a copy, and of course it proved her client's innocence, that they did not actually plant this bomb. And it sounds very much like that there was this, this case. It was the first time, I believe, that scientific evidence had been allowed to be used in the case against Monsanto. And, I think that Monsanto is Bayer, now they purchased Monsanto, are pretty scared at what's going to happen with these other pending legal cases.
And they should be. I mean, I'll tell you, what happened was there was a brilliant step-by-step presentation by Brent where he showed that there was epidemiological evidence, that there was animal evidence, that there was cellular evidence in terms of the mechanics or the causation. He described the specific sequence of events showing that, it was a perfect plaintiff. Lee Johnson had contacted Monsanto twice asking, is it possible that the rash and then cancer on his body was related to spraying of Roundup? He contacted them 2 weeks after the World Health Organization's declaration, and was never called back and told, yes, it might be. And so he continued to spray and got to a point where he actually now has terminal cancer, and they rushed this to judgment because he was expected not to necessarily even live through the trial. So Brent did all of these things, and it was brilliant, and afterwards it was like we were high-fiving, and not with him, but with others who were in the gallery. And then after lunch, it was the Monsanto's guy's turn. And what he did was actually kind of scary. He systematically went through the main points and presented quotes that drove the exact opposite conclusion. And I was like getting worried and saying, what happened? And so Brent had originally an hour and 45, and the opposition had 2 hours, and Brent was supposed to get 45 minutes of response, and because they're running late, they dropped it to 35. And we're all getting nervous. And he started, and he said, this was a brilliant example of the use of ellipsis, that ... Let's take a look at each of the quotes that were brought out by Monsanto's attorney. And each one was a phrase that he had skillfully left out the full quote or the full report. And in every single case, the actual full report or the full quote gave exactly the opposite conclusion. Mm-hmm. So the lawyer had cherry-picked arguments by lying, by skillfully covering up the truth, saying, oh, yeah, this document shows that their conclusion was that there was no link between Roundup and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then Brent said, actually, if you read the conclusion, it says there is a link. And so it was just brilliant. And then it turns out that the jury totally got it. Within 2 days, they had awarded the plaintiff $289.2 million. And, of course, it's being appealed right now, but it was absolutely perfect because they needed to hear that, because now there's 4,000 plaintiffs waiting to sue through class actions, and that's going to rise. That number's going to rise. And what was brought out in the press conference, and I did a live Facebook on it, it's got over 200,000 views already at the Institute for Responsible Technology's Facebook page, is they said, this is just one of the diseases. Now there's evidence that there's other diseases. And so, I was originally very upset that Bayer was buying Monsanto because Monsanto's future was in jeopardy because its Roundup was failing in the field because of the Roundup-resistant weeds, and because it was declared a carcinogen, it was being locked out of more and more markets. So Bayer threw them a lifeline, but now it turns out that since Bayer has so many more billions of dollars than Monsanto did, maybe we can then use Bayer's financial resources to pay the enormous lawsuits that may be piled up in the next few years.
There's been about a 13% fall in the price of Bayer's stock since this announcement, and has wiped probably almost a third off the initial acquisition value of Monsanto for Bayer.
I put out an article in a major financial site trying to convince the shareholders to say no. And I actually had, they didn't publish this, but I had 17 pages of endnotes and footnotes and citations. And I pointed out 10 different ways that Monsanto's liabilities could damage the bottom line of Bayer. And this cancer thing was just one of them, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is just one of the cancers. So there was 9 others. There was the impact we're finding on livestock when animals are fed. I was doing a Healing from GMOs series. It's healingfromgmos.com. People can sign up for the next time that it's made available. And I had 18 interviews with experts, and most of them were doctors and scientists and what to do about, getting our body back from after being ravaged by exposure to GMOs and Roundup. But one guy was an agronomist talking about the impact on soil, plants, and livestock as well as humans. And he did a little experiment at a pig farm where he had, I think, 2,000 pigs in one nursery and 2,000 pigs in another, and one was fed GMOs and one was fed non-GMOs, and in the non-GMOs there was 1 death. In the GMO fed there were 400 deaths. Mm-hmm. Now, so imagine if we can replicate that, and imagine the kind of liabilities that can occur to Bayer when the livestock producers realize that they've been losing money. And then, of course, if you look at the different ways that Roundup and GMOs can affect health, I did a peer-reviewed article where I reported on a survey of 3,256 people who had switched to largely non-GMO and organic diets, and they got better from 28 different diseases and disorders. And I describe how that is supported by the experience in livestock, in pets, how the animal feeding studies show the precursors to those same kind of disorders, how the epidemiological evidence shows that how more than 30 diseases are rising in parallel with the increased use of GMOs and the Roundup sprayed on them, and even the modes of action of glyphosate and Roundup. It's an antibiotic. It can mess up our microbiome, our gut bacteria, which is so necessary for health. It can cause leaky gut, which is linked to inflammation and all the inflammatory diseases and autoimmune disease and autism and Alzheimer's and cancer and heart disease. It's also an endocrine disruptor. It also can bind with minerals, shutting down metabolic pathways that might affect whether we have enough serotonin so to keep us happy and healthy, whether we have enough melatonin to put us to sleep at night, and dopamine similarly. And if you look at the mitochondria toxin that Monsanto is, that can affect our fatigue. And so the number one reported health improvement when people got better was always digestion. The number 2 was improvement from fatigue, and number 4 was reduction in brain fog. That's all linked to mitochondria, because that provides us with the energy. It's also linked to birth defects. I mean, when you think about it, it is basically a damming chemical it's now sprayed so much. It's in 60 to 100% of the air samples and rain samples in the Midwest where it is sprayed the most, which means it is actually in throughout the food supply. And it's not just sprayed on GMOs. It's sprayed to dry down the grains. It's sprayed to dry down wheat and oats and barley and rye, and also the legumes like lentils and mung beans, also a lot of vegetables, even vineyards where you have the wine grapes growing, and citrus. So you have glyphosate in orange juice, you have glyphosate in wine, you have it in all over the food supply. So people really need to switch to organic immediately. And what happens when they switch to organic? We'll take a look at the survey. If you go to non-GMOsimprovehealth.com, you can read the actual article. It's 26 pages. I don't recommend it. It's very detailed. It's more for the science. But there's a layperson's article on the same page where you can actually read the 28 conditions and see what percentage of the people who switched to their diets and reported improvement got better from each condition. 85% got better from digestive disorders. And people got better from weight problems. That was number 3. And anxiety and depression. That was number 5. I mean, basic stuff that's on the rise in the U.S. population since GMOs were introduced.
That was Jeffrey Smith, the founding executive director of the Institute for Responsible Technology and also the author of the global bestseller Seeds of Deception. He's also the creator of Healing from GMOs and Roundup Summit and the 90-day lifestyle upgrade, GMO speaker training, and the upcoming degree in GMOs. And we appreciate him being with us on part 1 of this series. In the meantime, we hope you can head over to AzureStandard.com. Azure Standard is a family-owned farm and distributor providing organic, non-GMO food, as well as thousands of products for health, home, and garden. If you're already a part of our Azure community, thank you so much for coming along. We're truly grateful for you. And if you're not, we hope you'll consider Azure Standard. It's how we feed our family. Until next time, we wish many blessings to you and yours.